This Let's Talk Climate episode is the final of 3 in a summer Blessed Tomorrow series on environmental justice. The previous episodes are already available on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel. Please watch and share widely so that we may all be the change that we hope to see in the world. I'm Reverend Carol Devine, an ordained minister with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and the director of Blessed Tomorrow program at ecoAmerica. I'm joining you today from my home in Lexington, Kentucky, on the traditional lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Yuchi, Shawnee, and Cherokee people. I am super excited and honored to be joined today by 3 amazing people from 2 Blessed Tomorrow partner organizations. Faith in Place is an American organization that works in Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, partnering with diverse religious and spiritual green teams to create healthy, sustainable, and just communities. Young Evangelicals for Climate Action equips, empowers, and catalyzes young Christians to love God and neighbors through bold, wholehearted, and faithful climate action in churches and communities in order to create a more just, equitable, and loving world. Both of these amazing organizations were finalists for the American Climate Leadership Award. Both organizations received $10,000 for their work, and you can learn more about them and how to replicate their programs at the link that is being put in the chat. The application process for the 2023 awards will launch on September 15th. Please visit ecoamerica.org to learn more. And if you have any questions, you can email with the link that's being put also in the chat, acla@ecoamerica.org. Now, let me introduce to you these 3 amazing people that I have become so blessed to get to know just a little bit. Cesar Almeida is the Youth Empowerment Coordinator with Faith in Place. Cesar lives and works in Chicago, and in addition to his great work at Faith in Place, he has a media production company that highlights environmental justice through music, dance, and nature. Also with us is William Morris. He is the steering committee co-chair for Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. Will is located near Los Angeles, where he grew up in the shadow of a refinery. His passion is helping people connect their faith to environmental justice. And then we also have with us Zavia Jenkins. Zavia is a YECA Community Fellow. That's Young Evangelicals for Climate Action Community Fellow. And she is a part of the Gullah Geechee Nation. She is located normally in Florida, but is today in Maryland with us. Zavia is passionate about the interconnectedness of people, lands, and oceans. Welcome to the 3 of you, and thank you so much for being with me today. Let's just jump in and get started. Environmental injustice looks different in different places. In my city of Lexington, Kentucky, the low-income neighborhoods are at least 10 degrees hotter than the wealthy, well-treed neighborhoods. The low-income neighborhoods in Lexington have few trees and green spaces. We all know that heat negatively impacts just us, but it really negatively impacts both our physical and mental health and spiritual health. Will, I want to start with you because you grew up in the shadow of an oil refinery, and I want you to tell us a little bit about how that impacted and impacts your community and how that has defined your life.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So glad to be here. And absolutely, the refinery is just down the street from my house. And it's kind of been this looming constant presence I always grew up with. And I remember when I was in school as a child, we'd oftentimes have to shelter in place, these bells would go off and we'd have to run inside because gases had escaped from the refinery. And this happened all the way from elementary through high school. And that's just not just like a one-time occurrence. It's pretty constant. And in high school, I took this environmental science AP class, and I was learning all about environmental science and our Earth and fossil fuels. And it was very ironic. You could see the refinery out of the back window of the classroom because it was 1 block away from my high school. And the refinery, as part of its normal operations, often will flare and burn off gas. And this can cause these toxic hotspots because of the pollutants it releases. And people who live right along the edge of the refinery have had their floors explode because methane has built up in the ground there. And the refinery itself, part of it blew up back in 2015. There was an explosion. And I was away at college at the time and feared, for the safety of my friends and family back home. The refinery down the street still uses modified hydrofluoric acid as part of its refining process. And debris from the explosion almost ruptured the tank of the modified hydrofluoric acid. And if it had been hit, it would have released this low-lying toxic cloud of gas that's really harmful and even deadly to human health. And so, that was a big wake-up call. And you would think a lot of, safety measures have taken place and other things, but no, ExxonMobil sold off the refinery to a new company and it still suffers from a lot of problems. And so now I keep a gas mask in my closet for when the next refinery-related disaster is bound to happen. And so I think it goes to show that these fossil fuel infrastructure, it's not just dangerous because it's contributing to our climate crisis, but it's also dangerous because of the harm it's causing to the communities around it as well.
Wow. Yeah. Zavia, you want to jump in and talk about environmental and climate justice, injustice, and what that looks like for the Gullah Geechee Nation or in the areas which you live more?
Absolutely. Yes. And thank you for having me, of course. But I definitely want to start by giving a little bit of background to the Gullah Geechee Nation as a whole. The Gullah Geechee Nation spans from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, the Sea Islands, and 30 to 35 miles inland. So we're all along the East Coast. We're the descendants of enslaved Africans, and we've been here since we were brought here. We still practice our language and our cultural traditions that developed from us being in this area. And a lot of the issues that we've faced being on the coast have been things such as sea level rise. We're really a frontline community, but in my local community in Northeast Florida, one thing that the Gullah Geechee Nation there has been faced with is the impacts of development, continued infrastructure, and the ongoing struggle to catch up with population boom. My family has lived through several road expansions, and not only has that impacted surrounding land and the marsh that's behind my home, but it's also displaced us. So as a community, it's been harder to connect with each other, where we might go across the street and bring a neighbor a basket of food or exchange goods and services, which is part of our tradition. It's harder to do that when there's a 3-lane highway, now a 6-lane highway, and it may continue to develop. Many people within the community have lost their homes, were forced to relocate, and it really is, it's disproportionately affected us. Sacred spaces like our churches and our burial grounds have been encroached upon, all in the name of this development and infrastructure. So these are just some of the ways that this, climate and development has impacted us as a people, as a community. And we're just continuing to fight to retain our culture, retain our traditions, retain the land that many of us raised generations on, raised food on, congregated and praised and worshiped. So it's ongoing, but we're a very resilient people. And Our chiefess, Queen Quet, who was installed 22 years ago now, has really spearheaded a lot of that advocacy to encourage people to fight for their land and protect themselves and the culture.
Yeah, thank you so much. Cesar, what about in Chicago there?
Yeah, Zavia, William, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'm learning a lot from you already. And for Chicago, I'd also like to start with some context there. Number one, Chicago is still one of the most segregated cities in the United States in terms of class and race. Also, Chicago, was a big industrial city. And so we are still in battle with that the impact of the industry, the steel industry in Chicago. And one last point of context I want to add is typically when people think about Chicago, we think about violence, gun violence, and et cetera. And just starting off on that violence part, I just want to acknowledge the fact that environmental justice is intersectional with social justice, and there's no way to separate the two. And a lot of times violence is incubated within neighborhoods that are disinvested in and have been disinvested in since 60 years ago to 100 years ago. And a neighborhood that's disinvested, you can really tell that there are abandoned lots, abandoned apartment buildings. There are food deserts. There's meaning, there are no fresh food options available. And not only in these neighborhoods are you facing like gun violence, but you're also facing health-related diseases, cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases as well. And so I think Chicago is an example of like how intersectional environmental justice is with all of the other injustices that we are facing as a society. One of the biggest movements lately in Chicago has been the battle against General Iron relocating to Calumet from Lincoln Park, which is an affluent neighborhood on the north side of Chicago, and they are trying to re-permit into a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood that has a heavy industrial history and that has still a lot of investment that is needed to clean up what has been already done. And so, there is legislation that we're working on in Chicago to have like permitting bills and a permitting process so that a recycling facility like General Iron can't just choose exactly where they want, how they want, and when they want, but they have to go through a vigorous process to achieve permitting and assess how this will impact the community. And so that's just a little summary of the many things going on in Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think just to kind of sum up, because one of the first questions that came in today already is asking about the basis of climate justice. And I think that you said it so well, Cesar, is that it is entwined with everything. Like justice is just entwined in all ways. And so racial justice and economic justice, energy justice, all of these things, climate, environmental, they all really underlie what some of us would call, selfishness and greed, right? And so those who are in power have created a system over time where parts of our communities are divided by interstates and highways, and that is a very common story. Detroit, Chicago, on the West Coast, as well as what you described, Zavia, and that food, energy, all of these things all intersect. And so we, as people of faith, are called to do something different, right? And to work towards justice. In fact, the prophet Micah tells us that the Lord requires us to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. You three have blown me away at the ways that you are living out your faith and that command where you are. And so I want to go back to you, Cesar, because I know that you have helped create an online environmental justice course that's launching next month, which is amazing. So I would love for you to just tell us a little more about that.
Absolutely. So I'm the Youth Empowerment Coordinator at Faith in Place, and I coordinate an environmental justice education program in the summer and academic year throughout all of Illinois. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, this obviously changed our approach and we had to go virtual. And so I really, as a learning scientist, and an educator, was really thinking about, what is something that we can do virtually together that could impact our eco ambassadors, like professionally, and also be useful to our community. And so what we ended up doing is, instead of having a very hierarchical approach to our education, we had eco ambassadors teach each other about environmental justice topics. We recorded these, and then I used my skills as an educator and transposed this onto an online instructional platform where youth across the United States can now learn about the subjects that our eco ambassadors are interested in. And there are so many modules in this environmental justice course. If you went through it, it would take like 3 hours to go through, but you probably would want to go through it over a couple of weeks so that you could really engage with the content. But at the end of the day, I think what you said, Carol, is really important. Like, we have to recognize that our fellow person, there's some stats here, right? It says 96% of Americans believe we have the right to live in a healthy environment. That is right. That is correct. So we are our allies. The common person is our ally. And one of the things that I try to teach our eco ambassadors is, hey, you are not the problem. You do not have billions of dollars at your disposal, and you are not making these systemic challenges. So you are not the problem. The fact that you threw out a water bottle is not the problem. And I really try to remove that guilt from our youth so that we understand that there is something to point to that is a problem, and that we can organize together with, and not really attack each other because someone's not composting or someone's not eating organic food. And so that 96-97% stat is, I think, it's just really important that, hey, like, you are my neighbor. We all probably want the same thing. And we have to organize together in order to make change against a really a 0.1%. So yeah, it's a little bit about the Eco Ambassador Program, the online environmental justice course, and some of the things that we try to teach our eco ambassadors.
Thank you so much. Will, I know that you have felt called by God to help Christians connect their faith and climate justice, as I said earlier. And so tell us a little bit about what that looks like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Cesar, for everything you said, really resonating with all of it. And I think helping Christians connect their faith in climate change, climate justice, environmental justice, it can look like a lot of different things. Oftentimes, many Christians have never even heard anything about caring for the earth at church. I know I didn't growing up. I never heard a single sermon growing up about why we should care for our common home. In fact, my childhood church saw environmentalists and science in a pretty bad light. And so many times the work is starting kind of at square one, and we're just trying to connect the dots between our shared faith values that we already hold and caring for creation, including people. And we as Christians, we're called to care for the most vulnerable. We're called to live out our faith in a way that positively affects one another by loving one another. We're not supposed to hoard wealth and resources. So these are all values that are needed when addressing climate and environmental justice. And so all we kind of do is connect those dots for people. I think a lot of people, those thoughts are kind of ruminating in their mind already. And so to connect point A to point B for people, it's not even teaching them something new. A lot of times it's really just tying together things that they have already known. And we want to tie our faith tradition to our current context as well. And so a lot of times that can look like different things in churches. Sometimes it's as big as giving a sermon on a Sunday morning if a pastor is open to that. Sometimes it's a workshop, on a weekend on eco-theology or how to green your congregation. Sometimes it's showing up and talking with college young adult groups. Young people are learning about this in school now as part of the curriculum, but it's not a part of what they're being taught at church. And so oftentimes there's a disconnect there. And so once I'm able to show up and say, hey, I'm Christian as well, just like you. And but for me, that means I'm actively living out my faith in this way, in speaking up and doing climate and environmental justice. I'll often get a lot of people who come up afterward, like after a service, and say that, I share these same thoughts, but I've never heard it voiced here before. And so I haven't felt like I could bring it up. And so oftentimes being that person who speaks up first can be a powerful thing. It can be scary, but the results can be incredible that come from it. Or oftentimes I get people who come up to me and say, well, my kid is majoring in environmental science or biology or whatever it may be, and having a hard time tying it to faith. And so kind of, jumping in with them and having those conversations. And oftentimes that was me in college as well, when I was getting my major in environmental science. I wish there had been someone to help me tie those things together. And so now I do my best to be in those spaces and be that person I needed when I was younger.
Thank you for doing that work. One of the most important things we can do as people of faith is just talk about it. Talk about how climate, environment, creation care, whatever words, how that intersects with how we are called to live out our faith. And so I give great thanks for the work that all of you are doing. Zavia, I know that your great grandfather was a pastor, was a preacher, right? Who built a Baptist church, and that really set the stage for you to grow up with a strong faith within your culture, in order to be able to make that connection between land and water and faith. And so I would just love, I'm a white person of privilege and would love to know how I can be an ally, supporter, co-conspirator, if you will, with you and others on these important issues.
Yes, I think that's a great question. And I also want to acknowledge what Cesar and William both said, because they mentioned education and they mentioned teaching and listening. And I think that's very important. My great-grandfather, yeah, I never met him, but what he and my great-grandmother stood for, was passed on to me. And my great-grandmother was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, her sisters taught. So, it's a reoccurring theme here that there are people who just don't know. And if you're willing to learn and you're willing to listen, you become an ally. Like Cesar said, that allyship is very key, because there are many communities like ours that have been doing the work over and over, have been consistently fighting and advocating for ourselves and for others. And it can be difficult, especially when there's intimidation and there can be lack of resources. But the point is, the community knows what it needs. And when it doesn't know, it's important to have a way to bring in those resources so that we can to elevate ourselves. So to answer your question, I would say, a white person or anyone who is outside of the community, the way that you can help is to be an ally, be willing to use your resources to open the doors, allow us to be at the table, allow us to be amplified and have a space for us to amplify ourselves, a platform such as this. This is allyship in and of itself. So yeah, I think, as I said, it's an ongoing experience, an ongoing process. And I'm fortunate to be in this work the way I am. I'm fortunate for the background that I received from my family, having the land, having the church on the land, still being on the family land. That's all a blessing. And so I just really wanted to reemphasize that. But allyship and education, that's really the key.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just so thankful for all three of you. You are so intelligent, but also creative and talented people. And I wanted to invite all three of you, but we'll start with you, Cesar. Just talk a little bit about the intersection of art in all the ways that we define it, and how that connects with environmental justice and faith/spiritual practices. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you so much for this question. I myself am a creative director, a DJ, and producer. And so I always try to use my creative outlets as a way to express myself or my concerns. And I think the best way to talk about your question is through an initiative that I am leading, and it's called Dancing for Environmental Justice. And it's under a program of my media production company called Planet Chambo. And what we do is we showcase green spaces in Chicago through DJ and dance performances. We also use drones to basically capture like breathtaking images of the space. And our goal is, number one, for the artist is to give the artist an opportunity to not perform in front of people, but to perform within nature. And so our audience is the natural space, right? Because we're and all the time when you're performing, you're thinking about social cues. You're like, oh, am I doing right? Do they like it? No, you don't have to worry about this. It's just the cameras, nature, and you performing. Then also, I think that we need to have more innovative ways in getting our message across, beyond conversation, beyond talk, because a lot of people love music. A lot of people love movies. People love photography. People engage with the arts for entertainment, and we have the ability to do that as artists. Last but not least, I'm gonna connect this now to a bigger industry, which is the advertising industry. The fight against climate change has had so many billions of dollars of marketing put into it to create doubt within the common person's image and mind of climate change, which is why there's so much doubt. And this money has been invested by the oil industry. So now, as artists, we have the ability in a decentralized way to market and advertise messages to our communities in order to get messages across as well. And we might not have billions of dollars behind us, but we do have people power and creativity behind us. And I think this is key for my media production business, and which is why I'm in this space, because we want to be able to document green spaces, the work that's being done, so that other people can use this footage as well to get their message across. So that is my connection. Yeah.
Yes, this is so many things are going through my mind as you're talking, Cesar, and I have watched the videos and just they're beautiful. Thank you so much. But it makes me think about how this work can be really heavy, right? I'm sure all three of us or all four of us would say this work can be really heart heavy, and it's really important to find joy and beauty in the midst of all of this. So I just love the intersection of this environmental justice work while experiencing joy in nature. I just think it's, what a beautiful thing. Cesar, Zavia, you all jump in.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And just to kind of jump off of it, I've been fortunate as a part of the YECA Young Evangelicals for Climate Action Fellowship to see a lot of that, come back up again as far as music and arts as a way to view climate and the environment. And I think it's important. The fellowship allowed me the opportunity to start a project, and I went with, a similar route as far as my goal being to record and gather the oral histories of the people in my community. I think that's so important. And, There are so many of our elders in the community who have stories that were not documented on paper, but they remember them and they've shared them with their children, with their children's children. And as a community and as a culture and as a people, that's such rich history. And so I want to continue recording and documenting that history, documenting the way that we worship, the way that we speak to each other, and the way that we congregate, because, God forbid there's a chance, or God forbid there's a time when we won't have that. You'll have it documented, and you'll have the people, and we'll understand the way we once were, and we'll understand the way that we can be as a people. I've seen one project called the Climate Vigil album, which was a Christian worship album that talks about climate through the lens of scripture. I think that's amazing. I think that's a great way for us as Christians and people of faith to share through music and praise and worship just how important this world is that we've been blessed to live upon. So yeah, I mean, I think music and art as a tie-in to science, I've always felt that there was a bridge there, and to see it come to life through many different people, instead of it being solely science-based, I think has been really a great thing to see.
Oh, just so great. Will?
Yeah, I'm sitting and thinking what Cesar and Zavia has said have opened up so many things in my mind. Thank you for sharing. It's wonderful to hear. And I think I've always found myself, like, when I grew up, I thought I'm not a super naturally artistic person. But I think on thinking about that, that's why art is so important to me, because it opens up my mind to be more imaginative and creative. I think growing up in a very conservative church, things were very much in their own camp. And so I kind of had separated spiritual things from science originally. And so now trying to weave those two back together, and find what has been lost. But art, it helps show me what is possible. Not just what is. I can dream through art when oftentimes I feel stuck, or when that eco-anxiety sets in, these different things, and it's hard. That is what helps me get out of it. And oftentimes I think we know what we're fighting against, what we're praying against, what we're organizing against, but sometimes it's hard to imagine what we're for. And I think art really helps us imagine that. What is this community that we are trying to build? What are the ways we're going to go about it? What is it going to look like and sound like? I think that's such a wonderful thing. And I oftentimes get comments from young people who they say, I don't think I know enough of the science. I want to speak up more, but I don't feel like I know enough. And I'm like, well, that's okay. And that's because the science is settled. we have all of the climate scientists and environmental scientists out there. We need more artists. We need more people who are getting across the message in different ways, that are speaking to people's souls. Not a lot of people are moved by graphs and statistics, and so that's why art is such an important way of reaching people, because it's not just reaching them through their head, but it's reaching them through their heart.
Yes, I just love this. What are we for? Let's focus on solutions. Let's focus on what are we for, and how do we live out our faith, and the coming together of all of these things through art is just beautiful and wonderful. Well, it's time for us to wrap up, but we did receive a question about books or videos that we would recommend on climate justice, environmental racism, etc. And I know that Cesar, you have a book that you wanted to recommend.
Yes, I do. I'm going to grab it right now.
Yeah.
So the book that I recommend is called Toxic Communities, Environmental Racism, Industrial Pollution, and Residential Mobility by Dr. Dorsetta Taylor. And the reason why I recommend this book is because it goes through the history of the environmental justice movement. And in order to make an impact today, it's really good to understand where the movement started and how it started. And Toxic Communities is a great book to investigate that. So that is one book. I don't know if y'all have other books that maybe I can read or anybody on here can read, but please feel free to share.
Well, and I also put in the chat, I haven't even put them all, but I put a few of previous Let's Talk Climate conversations that are on this topic. And so those are in the chat now that folks can look at. And also this is the third in three, series of 3 on environmental justice, Let's Talk Climate. So we have these as well. But we will continue to be sharing out information through our Blessed Tomorrow channels. And if you aren't a part of the Blessed Tomorrow community, if you would like to receive our newsletter to receive monthly updates, we would invite you to do that. We do have a climate ambassador program that I know has been shared in the chat as well, as another awesome way to learn more and to feel confident to be able to talk about these issues and all the things that we've been sharing today. So I'm just going to pause there and just give great thanks for the 3 of you, for your beautiful spirit, for your just light that just emanates from you. I give thanks for the work that you're doing, for how much I have learned from you, and just offer blessings on all 3 of you and on the work that you're doing. And please, let's stay in touch, because I've been so touched by you all. So from all of us here at ecoAmerica and Blessed Tomorrow, that is all that we have for today. But I would like to invite you once again to share with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate. Let's Talk Climate. Be sure to subscribe and follow Blessed Tomorrow for the latest thoughtful leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. Do join us on Thursday, September the 15th for Let's Talk Climate episode. You Can Do This, Replicable Models for Climate Action, the 3rd episode in our American Climate Leadership Awards series. Our next Blessed Tomorrow episode will be on September 22nd, again at 2 p.m. So from all of us at ecoAmerica and Blessed Tomorrow, thank you for being with us. People of faith are the perfect leaders for climate solution. We all stand on God's holy ground together. We need everyone every day. Thank you.